Joining us now to discuss the latest developments with regard to Iran is award-winning investigative journalist Lisa Daftari. Lisa, I really appreciate you coming on right now. There's a lot of, tensions regarding Iran. We've seen escalations back and forth, but it has seemed to calm down a little bit. So I just want to ask you, what is the response right now from the Iranian people? Is it still kind of the protest that we saw just a couple days ago?
Sure. I mean, look, for 40 years, if you ask the Iranian people what they think about their government, they've been disenchanted. We can take a look, for example, at Egypt after the Arab Spring. We thought that we saw a nation that was in perpetual protest mode, and that's because they just did not feel comfortable with what they ended up with for what they gave to go out onto the streets. The same thing is going on in Iran right now. We may hear less about it in the mainstream media for sure, especially in this country, and we're focused on impeachment and the trial that's upcoming. But the truth is that those disenchantments don't go away. And each time we call it something. It was a fraudulent election in 2009 that led to the Green Revolution. We called it the egg revolution 2 years ago. And this past year, we called it a gasoline uprising because of gasoline prices. And most recently, it was because of the downed Ukrainian flight, the killing of Qasem Soleimani, etc. But the root of these protests remain the same. It's the people's disenchantment. It's the human rights violations. It's a government that they don't believe in, and they feel suffocated. And that's the message that the Iranian people are trying to get out to the world.
And I mean, you could date back, I guess, to the late 70s, right? When the Islamic Republic first had that government regime change. And ever since, there have been kind of organic protests that have taken place. But as you said right there, more recently, it's kind of started to take up a little bit. I mean, you see the people heading to the streets, taking risks that, I mean, I can't stress this enough. If those individuals were, they're facing death, essentially, from what they're doing right now. I mean, we've even seen examples of people being pulled off of the streets, being beaten by police and stuff like that. Is this a movement that is happening organically throughout the country?
Absolutely. And social media has been such a friend to the Iranian people that the regime knows that. I've always said and always written about the fact that the Achilles heel of the Iranian government has never been, a dangling nuclear deal or sanctions or the world community. It's always been its own people, and that fear that those people will come out onto the streets and organically have a grassroots protest that will dethrone this government the same way that it happened in 1979. So much so that every time we have a protest, we also hear about the government shutting down the internet and not allowing Iranians to get on social media. But thankfully, the Iranian people are very, very technologically savvy. They find proxy servers. They find ways to bounce the connection so that they can get back onto social media and tell the world their story. I mean, I've always told the joke about how, if in 1979 there was social media, maybe this government wouldn't be the government that the Iranian people, protested to get. They would have wanted something much more secular, much more free, much more modern. Social media has allowed them to have this voice and to tell the world that this government is not what we want, despite the fact that this government goes on a propaganda campaign and paints a very different picture from the reality that they have back at home.
And you talk about that tech savviness, too, and I guess it kind of goes both ways because, for example, critics of Iran would say, now we should be looking out for cyber attacks because, of course, they can't match our military might. So that's the route that they'd go. But as you said right there, too, the people are also very much so tech savvy within themselves, and they've used different means to communicate. It may not be social media. We've seen the Iranian government try to shut down the internet in the country. But as you said, they've still been able to use satellite servers, different encryption methods in order to kind of get around the government's surveillance. So I guess this does pose a question, too. I mean, a lot of people in the United States don't want to see military intervention in Iran. Is there anything that the U.S. government or people can do to facilitate the Iranian people?
That's a great question. I think the number one challenge for the Iranian people has been twofold. First, how do they overthrow this government other than getting out onto the streets and having this be a very bloody, bloody revolution? Because as we know, as the protesters get emboldened, the government has become more and more harsh and violent with their crackdowns. And secondly, if they are successful in creating that revolution, who will replace them? Who will be that viable leader that will help organize and take them to the next chapter of their political destiny? And I think when we ask those two very important questions, many people say, let's give them guns. Let's give them the proper equipment to overthrow this government. Let's give them the tools to organize and to have the outlet of recruiting or gathering or organizing. I mean, they themselves are doing pretty well without having a face um, to this movement. Often the face to the movement becomes the people who get killed in the protests. People go out and say, let's fight for Neda, or more recently was some, young man that was killed in the recent protests. Let's fight for them. So the face of the movement has always been, someone that they're mourning for.
Sure.
So I think, it will be twofold, again, to help them overthrow this government and to help them organize and to have a leader that will take them to the next chapter. Look, for 41 years, the people of Iran have only known this government. That's a full generation and a half almost. So, it's very difficult to tell the young people or ask the young people what do they envision as their utopian, society, a government. What do they want? How do they see this? So I think they have a lot of important questions to ask and a lot of important answers that they're looking for in order to have better for years to come.
Yeah, and it's a lot of uncertainty too. As you said, like in the past, there's been evidence as these people kind of stepping up and kind of meeting the occasion head on, but there's also been responses by the Iranian government that have turned deadly. So, I mean, we should keep our attention on this. Just because impeachment is coming up doesn't mean that we can turn our eyes to this once again, because I think a lot of our viewers would say that conservatives were very quick to critique the prior administration when they did the same. But Lisa Daftari, I really appreciate you coming on, giving us this really insightful input regarding this very complex situation. Thank you very much.